Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, we are talking about the budget, the state budget. A new report released yesterday has some recommendations that could be potentially devastating to public education. We've got our team of budget experts on the show to talk about that.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it's just after 1 o'clock on a Wednesday. We welcome you to the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazwata, ACSA's Executive Director. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We are so honored to have you with us today. Go ahead and jump onto the chat and say hello and let us know where you're watching from today. Edgar, how are you?
I'm good, although I've seen the comments. I think it was Mark and a few others. I was like, we were just talking. I was like, I think people are already expecting bad news. They probably already seen the headlines, and but we'll try. We'll try to put a positive spin on things the best we can. But aside from that, I'm doing well, Naj. Happy to be here as always when we can do this on a Wednesday. Trying to think back with what's happening in ACSA land. I got a chance to be in San Diego for a good amount of days last week. We were hosting, not us as an ACSA, but California was hosting the AASA National Conference. So I got the opportunity to give a little welcome there. I think they had like 5,500 attendees. Wow. So that was kind of cool. Yeah. Started a little controversy. It was a national audience, and I was making the case for California. So I had a bit of a hot take, said that California Mexican food is better than Texas Mexican food. And that did not go over so well with, some of our Texas friends, but I'll stand by my words. I'm not going to back down, having tasted both of them. But that was great just to see so many of our members down in San Diego in a different setting and in a national setting. And San Diego is not a bad place to host a national event. So it was a good week there down south.
My question, because you probably are one of the, if not the most famous education executive director in the whole country. I mean, you have your own show.
Those are big words right there.
No. The biggest, the most famous, I guess my question is, did you sign any autographs while you were there? Did anybody want to pose?
I did not catch to see if we have any out-of-state legislative lunch break viewers there. I know we have a number of viewers who are starting California, and their loyalty, they'll go out of state and still keep watching. I'll make sure to throw that in next time, though, Naj. I'll throw out the link if anybody, get a few more viewers there.
Folks, if you were at the AASA conference and you're not from California, go ahead and jump onto the chat and show us the photo that you took with Edgar, because we want to definitely show those. Lester Powell first on the chat today. Sheldon Smith with us, and I'm assuming that's Neri since it says AALA on it. I'm assuming that's Neri who's coming in with from that tag today. We've got Megan Baier coming up in a couple of moments to talk about the state budget. We put this right in the open. Potentially devastating impact on public education. We're going to dive more into the particulars of the budget forecast, which has now come out from a couple of different entities. In fact, we mentioned this briefly last week, Edgar. School Services, our friends over there, they reported that January revenues were down $9 billion from the budget projections. Department of Finance, they work off their own data. They indicated in their monthly report that the state is down $5.9 billion since the governor's January budget proposal. Essentially, that means that the budget that he proposed, it couldn't be funded because of where we're at on those figures. And so then we get this coming from the Legislative Analyst's office. This came out yesterday. With recommendations for closing the budget gap, and California public education is right in the middle of this. And Edgar, I'll have you react in just a second, but the LAO recommends using the Prop 98 reserve withdrawals to cover the cost of payments to schools. meaning that the LAO recommends rejecting the governor's $8 billion funding maneuver to prevent cuts to schools and instead drain the reserve. There is more. The LAO recommends rejecting the proposed COLA and nearly all funding increases in the governor's budget. That is just so much that just came right out of there on a Tuesday morning. There's a lot to digest. Again, Megan's going to join us in a couple of moments. But Edgar, I want to get your reaction to this. We've heard different figures from a number of different entities about the budget shortfall, now about the tax revenues coming in lower in January. It seems to me that the LAO in their recommendations has recommended putting everything out there on the table and seeing what can be done by lawmakers to trim some of this budget shortfall. Your reaction just hearing some of those recommendations?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to say it, and we could go a long-winded way. Here's bottom line. What the LAO says, and I mean, if I could simplify it, not good. not good news, not what we want to hear. With that said, and I know Megan's going to talk about this, and for those that may have seen the headlines, and sometimes this gets lost, whether it be EdSource or, the other publications that pick this up, here's the good thing, the positive end. The LAO, while they are, we respect their voice, and while they serve a function here in the legislative process, here's one positive: they don't get a vote. they don't get to vote at the same time, and they're also not elected, right? And I think that is also the difference between oftentimes where we see the recommendations from the LAO, which undoubtedly will influence some of the thinking of the policymakers, but what is viable in terms of just bottom line, black and white, balancing the budget is always not feasible when it comes to the political realities. I mean, I think our reaction, and this is definitely the theme, is that, that what the LAO is throwing out there is a non-starter, that it would have, as you put it, potentially devastating impact on our students, on our schools, and we'll be pushing that. I mean, here's the flip side of that. The state, if this trend continues, they're not going to have a lot of good options. They're not. I mean, we're already utilizing the rainy day fund. They're already having to get a little creative. I think that creativity is only going to have to increase as we go here during budget season. But I know that Megan will have a lot more to say on that front. But not positive news. But I think trying to put a positive spin is that it's one metric. It's a data point. There's a lot of this conversation left to go here.
Yeah, and folks, if you want to jump onto the comment section right now, if you have specific questions about the recommendations from the LAO, any of these different figures that we're getting, the governor's budget proposal, go ahead and put those into the comment section so we can ask our special guest about that. Let's bring on our special guest. Megan Baier is ACSA's legislative advocate. She focuses on education budget. I believe, Edgar, she is now a 5-timer here on the ACSA Legislative.
Well, but can you even? Okay, here's the thing with Megan now. I don't even know if that's. She's now I think has the record for the most appearances as a stand-in host. Nearing others, frankly, have already declared that they like it better when Megan's here than when I'm on. So I don't disagree. So I don't know, 5 times, but she should have a special name tag at this point.
Yeah, you know what? Special name tag. Maybe she gets one of those old Century 21 real estate blazers that she can wear.
There we go.
Wear the Getty oil ones. Megan, good to have you here with us again. Okay, so the state released updated revenue estimates. It sounds like the budget picture is changing day after day here in California. What's the latest?
Yeah, well, I think first I'm just going to say I'm not going to quit my day job. I'm going to be an advocate. Thanks for having me again for the 6th time or 5th time, whatever it is. But yes, I think, as you alluded to, Naj, revenues continue to come in lower than the governor's budget proposal that came out on January 10th. So tax receipts are down by $5.9 billion, capital B there, which is pretty significant. We've got a few more months to go. And if this trend continues, we're going to have an even bigger shortfall that has to be addressed this year. I think the other concerning thing that we're seeing is the out-year projections for how the economy is going to fare continue to worsen. So it's looking more and more like we're going to have several years to weather the storm here.
Megan, I know you've been busy since, even before that, and we were having you, and I will give you credit, right? When we were having the conversation after the budget release, this is kind of one of the things that you said we're worried about what those revenues are going to look like in the months to come, and that we would be in this situation. And the trend, unfortunately, is one place we wish you would have been wrong at that point, but that this could have been something that we saw coming. So as you just talked about it, Naj mentioned it, it sounds like the LAO is fundamentally bringing forth an alternative approach to balancing the budget, right, than the governor. They're taking a different approach because of the reaction. Maybe you dive into that just a little bit more. And then also maybe a little bit of what is your first impression about what are the reactions are. Obviously, I know you were with some of our colleagues and some of the other statewide organizations. Any reaction from the legislature or from others? How are folks responding to what the LAO has put out there?
Yeah, so I guess first to walk through what the LAO is proposing in their budget analysis. So rather than the governor has this $8 billion protection maneuver, as folks are kind of terming it, to protect us from a revenue dip that happened last year but wasn't realized till taxes came in November. So what the LAO is recommending is to reject the governor's approach and to fully use the Prop 98 reserve. That doesn't get us quite far enough, though. So they also recommend rejecting the cost of living adjustment to LCFF and other education programs. They also are recommending that the legislature should consider a host of both one-time and ongoing cuts and programmatic reductions. So I think this is the part where it's a little daunting to read some of the things that the LAO is saying that should be on the table. So they are suggesting considering sweeping funds from unallocated grants, including community schools, Golden State Pathways, teacher and counselor residencies, dual enrollment. They estimate there's about $4.5 billion in grants that were created in the past few years, but those dollars haven't been released yet. They also make suggestions to make temporary cuts to expanded learning programs, or also to the California Technical Education Incentive Grant, CTIG grant, which I know a lot of our members rely on for their programs that they offer. They also are recommending the governor to reject the increases to pay for the full cost of universal meals. You all have seen the take-up rate for universal meals continues to increase. Costs continue to increase. So the governor has proposed to provide additional funding to meet that demand and those costs. And LAO is recommending rejecting that. And then finally, they're also recommending reducing funding to a variety of ongoing programs, including TK, expanded learning, universal meals, and home to school transportation. So, it's a little overwhelming almost to hear all the programs that they when I read this, I was, a little bit floored, but they think that the state's fiscal condition is serious enough that those need to be considered.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really exhaustive list there, Megan. I started writing some of this down and I was like, okay, I just have to stop because there are so many things on this list. Folks, if you have a question for Megan about the budget or the LAO's report, go ahead and put that into our chat. We'll try and answer those in just a couple of minutes. Megan, you made reference to the governor's $8 billion, what the LAO calls the budget maneuver. Can you map out what this is and what the governor is doing?
Absolutely. So the governor essentially proposes, and again, to just kind of set the stage here, there was, because revenues, we didn't know what the state's fiscal condition was until after the budget was adopted. We're grappling with a hole that was actually existed last year, but we didn't know about it. So the governor, the state has to fill an $8 billion hole, essentially. So the governor doesn't want to claw those dollars back from schools. So that's the good news. He knows that would be really, really harmful to everybody. And so instead, he wants to leverage the state's cash on hand, so from different special funds and reserve accounts, to essentially, the LAO uses this term that I think is helpful to create an interest-free loan from the state's cash resources. So essentially using the state's cash power to cover that $8 billion hole over a few years so that schools don't see the impact. So it's a totally new maneuver. It's we've never seen anything like this before. So a lot of, folks in the field have been trying to understand and grapple with the implications of that.
Megan, we got a question from Nicole there. Mendocino County Superintendent of Schools, they're asking about universal TK, right? So if they are proposing that reduction, does that mean that the requirements for UTK? One of the big things, and we were getting this question a lot before, how does the budget deficit impact everything that the state has put on the field? So how does this change the situation there?
Yeah, that's a good question, Nicole. So back to what Edgar said, the Legislative Analyst Office, they make recommendations and the legislature considers them, and it's ultimately up to the legislature. What the LAO is proposing on TK is not to slow down the implementation, but the state gives districts ADA for each TK child that's eligible. And then there's also an additional add-on for the lower ratio that I know has been really challenging for many districts to fulfill. So what the LAO is suggesting is actually to reduce the amount of funding that's provided for TK, but not to remove the requirements. So very concerning for us.
Let me get to Heather Igarda's question. She's just curious. Did the administration / governor learn from the mistakes on the extension of last year's tax returns? Surely they won't go down this road again, or will they? I know I'm having you bring out your crystal ball a little bit there, Megan, but certainly some lessons learned for the administration.
Well, it was actually the feds. It wasn't the state. So the governor didn't have any control over the tax extension. It was the feds issued the tax extension, and then California tends to conform with federal extension. So, I think it's a federal problem that became a state budgeting problem because of the way our budget process works. Right. I think the other kind of notable thing that creates challenges, there's upsides and downsides to it, is the state has to have a balanced budget every year. So we can't, when unexpected things happen like this very unique scenario, we don't have the ability to carry debt the way that the federal government does, for better and for worse. So that's why we have to grapple with these things this year.
Megan, I know we're getting some good questions there, and we'll encourage folks to continue to jump in, and we're happy to clarify anything. So, I know we're going to switch gears, talk about the trailer bill here in a second, and some of the proposals you talked to us about before. But one piece, this is just to remind folks who know, now you've been Team ACSA for a while, so we would just think of you as Team ACSA, and I'm happy that that's the case. But you in your previous life there, you were an insider on the policy team, the budget team that was thinking about what happens next, advising the Senate leadership. So the governor put out their proposal, the LAO put out their proposal. Kind of take us behind the scenes. What happens there? Where is the starting point? How much will they take these recommendations and run with them? Or is the starting point what the governor put out in January? Kind of what happens next?
Yeah, so over the next couple of weeks, we're going to start seeing a series of hearings to consider the governor's proposals. The Legislative Analyst Office typically is at those hearings, and they will, provide their commentary and their recommendations. And then we'll start hearing from the legislature. We'll start getting our first indications of what do they think, and so ultimately, the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly have to come to a 3-party deal to adopt a budget by June. I think, we've talked about the revenue picture. It is worsening. So likely the state's going to probably have a bigger hole to plug than the governor's January budget assumes. I will say, though, I don't think it's very likely we're going to see major program cuts this year. The legislature is going to be really hesitant to go there first. And there are tools in the toolkit. The governor's proposed essentially a new tool by using cash resources to keep us whole. We still could go to potentially deferrals first. We could, dip deeper into the reserve account. There's different tools at our disposal. And, in 2020, when revenues tanked and the, economy went really crazy, we didn't see the state cut then. They really want to slow down those drastic decisions and try to make sure they exhaust every tool before they go there. So, to your point, Edgar, yes, this is a serious situation. I don't think we're going to see like major slash and burn cuts, despite recommendations that read that way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up to our members, because I know sometimes, like we said, we see those headlines and we assume that that's going to happen. I just double down and agree with you, right? Like, for all the reasons we've talked about, election year, the national landscape, just and a new crop of legislators who really have only been here during these years where we had excess revenues. Going from that to all of a sudden going into cost cutting mode is not easy. Hopefully that's the case, but nonetheless, there'll be some impact, right?
The other thing I would just add too is that, so a lot of the programs that the LAO wants the legislature to take a look at cutting, they are programs that were created or expanded by just a few years ago by legislators, many of which were still in office. So I think that's another reason that there's going to be a lot of hesitance. Universal meals was led by Senator Nancy Skinner. The home to school transportation investments that were, led by many members who are still in the legislature. So I think that's another reason they're going to be looking to exhaust other tools before they go down the cuts route.
Megan, I do have a question, actually two questions that have come in from Colin Rowe. First one, and I'll have you respond to each one. Colin asks, is the governor's budget proposal still predicated on him calling a fiscal emergency?
So I think what you might be talking about, Colin, is in order to tap into that Prop 98 reserve account, there is a requirement that the governor declare a fiscal emergency. So in the event that he is going to tap into that, if the state decides to go down that route to tap into that reserve account, yes, he will have to declare a fiscal emergency because that's a requirement to use those funds.
Okay. And then second question, is there a cutoff for when the tax revenues from last fiscal year, when will we have the actual money?
Okay. Not 100% sure. I totally understand the question, but essentially the state collects revenues on an ongoing basis. The main deadline is April, as we all know. There's all kinds of extensions though. And so we collect revenue throughout the year. So this April, hopefully there are no, Heather, to your point, hopefully there's no emergency declarations at any levels or emergencies that require that kind of a declaration. So we have a much more clear picture in April. So, to that extent, we should have a better actual deficit amount. Sorry, I saw Colin's comment here coming in. So essentially we should have a much clearer picture this budget year. And then Colin, I see your secondary and I understand what you're saying. When will we know what is the deficit? The thing about the deficit is because the state collects funds on an ongoing basis, it's always going to be evolving and changing as the revenues, evolve and change. When we see those April tax receipts come in the May revision before the final budget's updated in June, that's really when we're going to the state's going to have to land on what's the size of the hole. So probably around April, May, that's when they're going to have to actually figure out how to balance the budget.
Megan, your talking and reading skills are next level. You give some credit there. I don't know. I could do that myself. So appreciate you rolling with that. Switching gears, and we'll come back if there's any final questions on just the pieces that you give. We've alluded to this proposal on attendance and, what happens in the cases of emergency. And while I tried to strike an optimistic tone saying, hey, maybe there's an opportunity for some good stuff. I think as we're learning more details, maybe we're having a less than positive reaction to that. Do you mind resetting on what is that's been proposed and maybe some of the challenges that we're seeing from what the governor's office has put out?
Yeah. So, in addition to the overall fiscal condition, when the governor releases his budget, he always, has his own proposals that go along with it. The governor has proposed what we're calling an emergency school closure proposal that we have a lot of concern about. Essentially, the proposal would require for any kind of emergency for which a school closes. So whether you're talking about a power outage, fire, flood, mudslide, all the things that communities face from time to time, districts would be required, if the closure lasts more than 5 days, districts would be required to offer remote instruction or to help students enroll in another school where they can get instruction. I think, one important thing to note, the remote instruction does not have to be independent study. So we're not, opening that can of worms. But I think nonetheless, we're very concerned just given the physical reality of emergencies and, the kind of stress that creates in a community, teachers, staff, administrators who may be evacuated under evacuation orders, power outages. I experienced one. A lot of us in NorCal, at least, I think SoCal too, we experienced major power outages. I had a school closure a couple weeks ago because my kids' school, they lost power in that big storm that happened. So we just think this is a really bad precedent to set. And then, so if the district wasn't able to offer remote instruction, they would not be able to secure a J13 waiver to get funding as we have in past with previous closures. So super concerning proposal for us.
All right, Megan, I've done the math here. Okay. I've done the math. And Sheldon, since you're on, you can tell me if I got this right. Okay. Dr. Bardak has been on the show 7 times. Patty Herrera has been on the show 4 times. Tony Thurman has been on the show 4 times. Megan has 5 appearances as a guest, 3 appearances as a co-host. So Edgar, that, if I check my math, that says 8. So that's 8 appearances. So she's got to have something, right?
Yeah, I would think so.
Do I win a mug? Where's our lunch break?
A mug, something. Yeah, we're still working on that swag. I know we get the question every so often. So
I know
Megan will be the first. She'll get one delivered to her office whenever we get that.
Absolutely. Megan Baier, ACSA Legislative Advocate, our budget expert here at ACSA. Megan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Edgar, I will ask you for your closing comment on all of this, because it's been, we can be honest, it's with all of these facts and figures coming out over the last couple of weeks. I mean, it's you really got to follow it. You really have to kind of map it out. This thing that comes out from the LAO this week, I mean, yes, the legislature doesn't have to follow one bit of this thing, but just from an education management perspective, what are your thoughts on what you heard from Megan and then just your experience in the Capitol and having been at LA Unified?
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it tempers our expectations, right? Even if nothing here or the final product isn't what the LAO is recommending, it does fundamentally change the conversation we're having, right? This is not the year where we're going to see augmentations. This is not that we're playing defense. I mean, here's the bottom line: we're playing defense this year. And I think all of us who have this responsibility in our GR team and us as an organization, we're going to work with not just ourselves, but our other partners in the Ed Coalition, the teachers unions, or, CSBA, to really do the educating. I know we have Ledge Action Day coming up here in a couple months. I know we're going to be pushing that quite a bit. This is no big surprise. Some of these things are going to be some of the pieces we're going to want our members' help on talking about what the reality is, not the specifics, and not to be experts on all the stuff that we said today, but what is the practical impact, especially as we're just emerging out of the impact of the pandemic and we've been able to make some strides. So we have our work cut out for us, but I think as Megan said, this is a process. The legislature has other tools at their disposal, and we'll hopefully lend that voice as we move forward.
Hey, folks, I want to remind you, coming up March 17th through 19th in Anaheim, we have our ACSA Lead with Pride Summit. It's an event you don't want to miss. Take a look. Yes, that is our Lead with Pride Summit coming up March 17th through 19th in Anaheim. For more information and registration, ACSA.org/lead-with-pride. And folks, if you like what you've been watching here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to subscribe to us on YouTube or like us on Facebook. When you do so, you'll get instant alerts when Edgar and I are going to come on with some breaking news. And of course, a reminder about our regularly scheduled Wednesday show. And if you have great stories happening in your school district, we want to tell those stories too. Go ahead and email your photos, your news releases, your bullet points, your paragraphs to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl at ACSA.org. And folks, it's been a lot of information. Hope you've been able to digest it. We, of course, will continue to monitor this budget situation, Edgar, and we will keep you updated as things happen. Thank you, folks, so much for being with us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.